Hello everyone! Welcome back to the channel, and today we will be doing something very special. This will actually be the start of a brand new series on my channel, that being turning generic train items into Thomas items. So a while ago, I found these two generic motorized engines from a thrift store, and thought it would be a very fun project to turn them into Thomas characters. These engines are actually incredibly close to the motorized engines from the Thomas range, which is pretty interesting. Both engines have magnetic coupling similar to Wooden Railway, as well as being remote-controlled engines. Both the steam engine and diesel engine require 3 AAA batteries to run. Both of these are compartments that are able to be removed on the engines. Both engines fit perfectly on Trackmaster track, which is great, and they're also pretty much in scale with Trackmaster engines. Interestingly, just like classic Trackmaster engines, when the engine is off, the wheels can move, and when the engine is on, the wheels can't. Like I said before, the engines have magnet couplings, meaning that they can connect to Wooden Railway engines. Alright, so for the steam engine, pretty much all I'm going to be doing is just repainting it, which should be pretty simple. As for the diesel engine, it will require a couple modifications to make it look a bit more realistic, and also I might repaint it too. For this episode, we're going to be working on the steam engine first. Next episode, we'll take a look at the diesel engine. Here we are at the workbench. This is where I make all of my customs. And wow, yeah, it's pretty messy. I should probably clean that up. First up, we have to dismantle the steam engine. This is pretty easy as we just have to remove all the screws. Also, I realized that in order for this engine to actually run, we're gonna have to remove the remote control function of it, which actually seems pretty hard. After removing another cover, here is the circuit board, and interestingly, there is actually a speaker. Here's the motor, and looking at all this stuff, it is actually making me pretty overwhelmed. So maybe let's look at painting the engine first. So I'm thinking a nice color would be a very nice bright red. First though, we're gonna have to prime the engine. I'm using a white spray paint for the base of the engine so that the red paint will look very nice and bright. After that, we can now paint the engine. The paint I'm using is Tamiya spray paint. While the engine is drying, I decided to go ahead and remove the speaker. I also removed part of the RC function. Now comes the hard part. Somehow, I'm gonna have to figure out how to wire a switch to this engine so that I can have a on and off function, rather than the remote controlled function. I also decided to go ahead and add a Trackmaster coupling on the back of the engine. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the engine to work properly, so now the engine can only turn on when the batteries are connected, and only turn off when the batteries are not connected. Also, I can only get one pair of wheels to run on the engine. The back set of wheels should also be able to work, but they weren't working. I decided to start adding the detail on the engine. I painted the pipes and handrails in black. I used Tamiya masking tape on the windows so that I can have very clean edges when I painted them. I just used a regular black acrylic paint to paint the windows, and it came out pretty alright. Now time to add the weathering. All I did was I used a cosmetic beauty blender and put it in black paint and applied it onto the engine. Yeah, I kind of added a little bit too much weathering, but I mean, it's fine, I guess. I also started to add some rust weathering on the engine where I thought it made the most amount of sense. I crushed up some pastels and used the dust for rust weathering, as well as also making rosy cheeks on the engine's face. Once I liked how it looked, it was time to give it a clear coat to save the paint from getting scratched. I used a satin clear coat by Rust-Oleum. And with that, the engine was almost done. I actually was able to get the engine to run properly with a brand new switch, and also a very helpful tutorial that helped me install it. Yippee! All we need now is to just name this engine, and I think I'll name her Kathy. And this project is finally completed. It was a lot of fun making this engine actually, and I really did enjoy it. Now let's see this engine in action. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and welcome to the second part of turning generic trains into Thomas trains. If you don't know what this series is, it's basically a series where I take generic trains and basically make them into Thomas characters. In the first episode, we made the steam engine, named Kathy. In this episode, we'll be doing the diesel engine. First off, we're gonna have to modify the diesel engine, as there are a couple things that I want to change on it. First up, we're gonna need to change the front of the engine, as this is not gonna cut it. Obviously, this type of diesel locomotive does not have buffers, it just has a cowcatcher, so we're gonna have to make one of those. Second of all, we're gonna have to make some axle boxes, as again, this type of diesel engine does not have exposed wheels like this. It looks fine on the steam engine, but not the diesel engine. Other modifications will include repainting the engine and also adding a on and off switch. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here we are at the workbench. First up, we're going to dismantle the engine. We have to do this to get to the motor and circuit board. It'll also make painting the engine a lot easier. Once we remove this plastic case, we can see the circuit board and the RC functions. We're gonna have to get rid of that later. Here we have the speaker that was inside the engine, as well as the circuit board. I removed the magnet coupling and replaced it with a Trackmaster coupling so that it could pull rolling stock and coaches. I was going to need to modify this piece of plastic that goes on the roof of the engine so that it could hold the new switch. All I had to do was just modify the roof piece to fit the switch and glued it in place. While we're waiting for that to dry, let's focus on the diesel engine. Before we even start painting the engine, we're gonna have to remove these side decals. I was gonna use nail polish remover, but unfortunately it didn't work, so I was gonna have to sand it off, which is something I did not want to do, as it took a long time. But I did it anyway. It came out pretty alright, and I was happy with it. The next thing I was going to need to do was remove the buffer details and scratch build a brand new front of the diesel locomotive. This type of diesel locomotive has step ladders and a cow catcher on the front, so I was going to have to make those. I started off with removing the front buffers and sanding down the front. After that, I used plastic card for the main construction of the footplate, step ladders, and cow catcher. I had a spare Adventures Henrietta lying around, and I thought that it would actually be a really good idea to add the coupling from it onto the front of the engine. Alright, now let's move on to getting this motor working. This should be relatively easy, as I've already done it with the steam engine. First I remove the speaker, and then I remove the circuit board. We're gonna need the battery terminals though. I put some new wires on the motor and reinstalled the battery terminals. After that, it was pretty simple, as all I did was I just rewired everything back together. There was one thing that was bothering me about this engine, and I couldn't really figure it out until I looked at the back of the engine and realized that there's actually nothing on the back of the engine. No buffer beam, nothing. This is actually something that was also on the steam engine, and I didn't realize that. I did want to try to put something on the back of the engine, but I just couldn't figure out anything that would actually look good. So I just left it the way it was, and started working on the wheels. So originally, I was going to make the axle boxes out of plastic card, the same way I made the front of the locomotive. But, thankfully, at a thrift store, I actually found a train chassis that I could use. The axle boxes I was going to use for this custom was from a Polar Express tender. Wait, this isn't the Polar Express, this is the North Pole Express. Huh. Anyway, we're going to be using these wheel sets for our diesel engine. I test fitted the axle boxes on, and they honestly looked really good. I was really happy with them. Now it's time to paint the engine. All I did was I just masked off the windows with some Tamiya tape so that I wouldn't get paint on them. Someone actually commented that I should paint the diesel engine into the same colors as the freight trains from GTA 5. It was just such a good idea that I had to do it. So thank you for suggesting that. I spray painted the engine white, waited for it to dry, and then painted the running board and front in black. For the finer details, I used a Posca paint marker. I cut out some little circles from plastic card to fill in the holes on the wheels, and then I painted them. Now it's time for the weathering. All I did was I dry brushed crushed pastels onto the engine in places where I thought it would make sense. It came out pretty alright. The chassis wheels were painted black, and I gave the entire engine a clear coat finish. I think we'll name this engine Moxie. That's a nice name. And with that, the custom was finished. Let me know in the comments, what do you guys think of these customs? Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later.